Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here with my next Airspeed's Avatar Rewatch video. This one's going to be for Book 2 Earth, Episode 4, The Swamp. This is animated by JM Animation, so the main studio, but yeah, overall this is a very interesting episode to look back on, given some of the stuff. Obviously we returned to this place, the swamp, in Korra, learned a little bit more about it, but I think just as where it takes place here, early in Book 2, it's an interesting point in that direct relation to the plot of just like fighting an earthbending teacher is obviously a lot like, yeah, we do actually get to see Toph here for the first time, albeit through a vision, but still seeing Toph for the first time. But I think what this episode does well is that it turns what could have been another Great Divide style episode of just they come to a somewhat notable place within the world and have to get through it as part of their journey and make it more interesting. And the big thing that they do differently than the Great Divide, of course, is that they present it in a way where it's not just you should forget about this stuff as soon as the episode ends, and instead it's just like, actually, we want you to think about the mystery of this place, like how they end the episode with the question of like, everything's explained, but what about the tornado? And everyone's just like, what tornado? I didn't do that. I can't do that. And it's just like, oh, there's more to the swamp here than what we know. And that the very end of the episode implies that the swamp is more than just kind of this kind of vision place, and it's all connected by the banyan tree, but like that the swamp is actually alive and can kind of do stuff on its own, and can seemingly change the weather around it as well and create stuff like a tornado. And that means it's a very, very interesting place if we were ever to potentially find out how exactly this place came about. But that's just a kind of weird origin story of like how did the start of a swamp or something like that. But in addition to that, it's not just the swamp itself and how interesting it is. We also get introduced to the inhabitants of the swamp, which is the Foggy Swamp Tribe, and another just like, oh cool, here's other waterbenders, and it's basically a third water tribe, but more in the middle of the world, so separate from the two northern and southern tribes at the two poles. Instead you have this third tribe, which is completely different than the other two. And it's an interesting one in that, like, we later learn, of course, that the Foggy Swamp Tribe formed by people basically separating away from the Southern Tribe. So the Southern Tribe is formed by people separating from the North, and then the Foggy Swamp Tribe is formed from people separating from the South. And obviously the idea is that they find this swamp, there's lots of water there, they learn plant bending, and they just come to inhabit that place. And it becomes what is more or less like the most free, the most seemingly lacking in rules culture of all of the tribes, because even the Southern Tribe has still some of the traditions from the North. And you can see, especially with later appearances from the Swamp Benders, that like there are women warriors and stuff like that, which, while it seems like the Southern Tribe was a bit more open about that sort of stuff, it still wasn't exactly the biggest thing within Southern Water Tribe culture. So the Foggy Swamp Tribe is the biggest kind of departure from general Water Tribe culture. And just finding out that living in the swamp, the accents that they have, they make them kind of fun and interesting characters while also being skilled in a very different way. And it really is kind of stuff like this that really makes you think, like, this is why by the end of the series you really kind of have to say that Katara is right up there with Palku for being the best waterbender in the series, because what she has over him is that she's experienced basically every single style of waterbending that exists in the world, because she has actually explored the world more than he has. What she's lacking compared to Palku by the end of the series is, I think, just pure battle experience and age, and the fact that she still is, by the end of the series, quite young. But definitely just the fact that she has knowledge of Foggy Swamp style and some of their unique forms, primarily the swamp bending, and that clearly plant bending, clearly wasn't something she'd thought about until here. But immediately it's like, oh, she can now add this to her arsenal, knowing this other tribe, and then by the end of the series gain some of Southern style back from Hama. And that combined with learning Northern style primarily, and she's a very complete waterbender, knowing most of the different forms and styles available. Plus, she's a healer as well. So that's a very interesting discussion to have. And I think by the comics, like North and South, Paku, I think, realistically considers her like right there with him as like the best waterbender in the world. In that, I think he more or less acknowledges that like she's kind of a better teacher than him, and while perhaps he still feels he could like defeat Katara if they had like a proper battle, he knows that she will surpass him. I think is kind of the implication that I get from their dynamic. But yeah, we'll quickly cover the Zuko stuff in the episode before we get into the details on the swamp stuff. So it's very quick. It's just the very start and very end of the episode, with the core being the return of the Blue Spirit. But it's set up within the first scene, in that a cart goes by, a merchant's cart goes by, has masks on it, and you can see, if you look very carefully, one of those masks is a Blue Spirit mask, which immediately makes it that, like, okay, the Blue Spirit is actually a fairly well-known mask. And this is where like the comic, the search, and also information from one of the later episodes, I think it might be Ember Island Players, comes in, of just like Zuko revealing that his mother liked to bring them to these sort of plays performances, immediately establishing that Ursa likes these sort of things, plays. And then the search plays on that hugely by establishing that her favourite play was Love Amongst the Dragons, and the Blue Spirit mask is from that. And so it makes sense why it would be sold in like a random Earth Kingdom town here. So that's how Zuko obviously gets a second Blue Spirit mask here, despite the other one being, of course, damaged, destroyed when he was hit by the arrow the first time. But the core here at the start in the first scene is that they're obviously in a very low position now, on the run from Azula. They have to go from being royalty and having some support to now being completely on their own and basically having nothing, having to basically here beg for money. And because Iroh is very adaptable and willing to accept his now kind of, I suppose, lower position in the world, he's able to embrace and actually earn them some money, whereas Zuko's not willing to kind of put himself down to that level just yet, except that he's not royalty as such anymore. And he's not happy with the fact that, some people take advantage of the fact that they're in that low position, like the guy forcing Iroh to dance and then, using the swords in or around his feet. And Zuko, of course, takes revenge for that by the end of the episode. And this is how he gets his swords back, by stealing them from this guy, getting more money from him and stuff like that. And it's just meant to show the return of the Blue Spirit, that while Zuko can't go after Aang, what he's doing here is basically, stealing from people around him to, help himself, and kind of, just showing this different side of him where he is, at this stage yet, still unwilling to accept the role that he's in. He has to, wants to steal money from this sort of thing. And it really takes, I think, the introduction of the Order of White Lotus and kind of stuff that happens after that to really kind of turn Zuko around on everything. Because, it's only a small portion of the episode, but it just highlights that, the Blue Spirit is this persona for Zuko that really represents kind of it represents kind of, I suppose, the side of him that thinks he's kind of should be royalty, whereas the Zuko that ultimately is kind of destined to be, the Fire Lord, is the one who kind of is almost willing to go away from it in a way. That the second he stops kind of thinking he should be the Crown Prince, that's kind of like the moment where like he is perfectly destined for it. Because the whole idea being that the current line of Fire Lords is very power hungry, and that's led to nothing but ruin. And so Zuko, the second he forgets about that even coming into play, and is just completely like humble, that's when he turns out to be the perfect one for the job as the next Fire Lord. But But yeah, let's get into the swamp stuff. So the tornado remains the big mystery with this whole thing of just, yes, it's just completely unexplained. There's no real way to base anything off of this beyond that, okay, the swamp is alive. If it can have this effect on Aang where it kind of like in his mind draws like Aang and co towards the swamp, then very clearly, like, you know, the idea that it could create this weather pattern around the swamp isn't too far fetched, but still something has to actually create that, you know, tornado of wind, very accurately to suck them in, and it speaks to like what on earth within the swamp could do that, and it has to be some sort of a spirit with that power. The only thing I could think of would be like Malu from the trading card game, who's kind of hinted towards the end that like she escaped the Air Norma genocide and fought firebenders across the Earth Kingdom, and kind of became this protector of the mountains and was known as kind of like a ghost witch in a way. And it's more or less stated that over time she potentially became a spirit. They're not very clear on if that happened, but if it is, maybe she could be some kind of spirit of wind that kind of has some connection to the swamp. But you know, it's trying to link up two parts that don't really link up. So definitely a weird one. But basically, the core of what happens here is that Hugh attacks them because Sokka's cutting the swamp up with his machete, and he ends up separating them up solely for the reason that he feels that the group is disrespecting the swamp. He's not actually their enemy, because the second they reveal by the end of the episode that Aang's the Avatar, immediately he's just friendly with them. But what happens here is that when they are separated from each other, they each have this vision within the swamp. So Katara has this vision where she sees her mother off in the distance, runs to her, and it's just revealed to be a, you know, conveniently shaped kind of tree stump with a certain type of lighting, and you can see how upset she is. And the idea by the end is that it kind of reveals people that they've lost that are very important to them, and this sort of stuff. Time is an illusion, so Aang gets a prediction of the future. But it really is one of the first times within the series where we really, really get the sense of the loss of Kaya, Katara's mother, to her is probably the most important kind of event in her life in terms of shaping who she is, in that she's mentioned her mother before with the betrothal necklace and stuff like that, but the absolute importance of Kaya to Katara hasn't really been presented just yet, and I like that it's kind of brought up here quite heavily, that this is a very meaningful connection that she's lost. She's kind of mentioned it a few times just in the sense of like relating to other people with the fact that she's lost someone in this war and other people have also. Sokka has a vision of Yue, and specifically Yue blaming him and not protecting her, which obviously isn't Yue, but the idea that that's how Sokka sees how it went down and sees how Yue must see him at this point. That even though it was Yue's decision, completely her decision, she made up her mind, and her father was proud of her for this, and she was willing to accept this, that Sokka feels like he fundamentally failed. And this is where, from here on out, we get this little arc until Suki comes back into the series of him being quite protective, and then even when Suki comes back, he's very protective of her, and it takes, you know, Suki's strength as a character to show that she doesn't need to be protected, that, you know, they can have a relationship without it needing to be Sokka as a protector, and, you know, him gaining some kind of some sense of moving on from what happened with Yue. And then Aang is the most mysterious one, of course. He gets a vision of this girl in a dress, and then this kind of flying boar chases her around as she's laughing, and obviously we don't really get much of a sense of what it is here, except by the end Aang is pretty certain it's something about the future, which comes into play very shortly. But you know, just this really, what I like about it, I think, is just that it isn't in any way explained apart from it might happen in the future. But looking back at it now, it's just like, this is the person who's your earthbending teacher should be. And that's a pretty cool first setup for Toph. Um, and I like when the group gets back together. You know, it's Katara and Aang are very open about what they saw, but Sokka's like, even though I did see something, I don't want to tell you guys that it doesn't really mean anything. Again, Sokka the skeptic about a lot of this stuff. But as he reveals by the end of this episode, the skeptic about all of this stuff, except when it comes to Avatar stuff, he's willing to accept that Avatar stuff is very weird and that he can accept what's happening on that side of things. But yeah, then we get the big fight with the Vine Monster, which is very cool. We get to see Aang and Katara especially be quite effective in this fight. Katara with the crazy waterbending, like multiple scythe moves that she does to cut him up, is really awesome. And then Aang doing some quite powerful airbending moves to kind of keep the vines away from him. But yeah, just establishing that Hugh, even though very clearly he's not like a super heavy combat bender, but is skilled enough that he can be that really powerful character. Makes his appearance later on in the invasion very important, just with the sense of like that's how powerful he actually is, even though you wouldn't necessarily. I think later when he reveals the whole enlightenment thing, you don't really think of him as like a combat guy, but he actually is super powerful. But the second they reveal that Aang's the Avatar, it's just like, come with me. And I really like what he explains here, in that he was just protecting the swamp from Sokka, basically. He's the guardian of the swamp, specifically the banyan tree, and that he achieved enlightenment under the banyan tree, which is very, very interesting. In that it's just this sense of he has gained this like understanding of the world that potentially a lot of other people haven't, and he kind of imparts this wisdom upon Team Avatar here of like basically the idea everything is connected. And I really like the quote that he gives towards the end, and he says, we all have the same roots, we're all branches of the same tree. Just with the idea of like, yes, the direct relationship here of the swamp fundamentally is just the roots of the banyan tree. That's all the swamp is. It's just that one tree that stretches on for miles and miles because of how big it is. And that means everything, the swamp is connected. But it also represents the world. All humans are fundamentally the same. They're all the same species. But as the Guru later explains, of course, going off the same idea as Hugh here, we're all the same, but we live as if divided. And Hugh here establishing that they all have the same origins and we're all branches of the same tree. And then later on saying, time is an illusion and so is death. With the idea that to kind of help Katara and Sokka with what they saw, that your memories of people that you've lost is kind of in a way that you still have them, because you remember them after their death. They're still fundamentally there. That means their kind of death is an illusion, and the timing of like when exactly that happens and when you remember them it's kind of hard to explain, but it's a very meaningful kind of philosophical kind of statement there that has huge impact. And just for a Nickelodeon show to kind of be presenting these ideas is, I think, very, very interesting, just to make you think. And it leads to Aang obviously doing this kind of avatar power of being able to connect to the whole swamp and basically sense everything connected within the swamp and find out where Appa and Momo are. And then they obviously meet up with Do and Tho, who've been chasing Appa and Momo the entire episode to try and eat them. And I like how this whole thing comes to an end with just like Do and Tho versus Aang and Katara waterbending, and they're both like, hey, we're all waterbenders. Let's be friends. And it's just like, oh, they all know each other, and by the end they're just suddenly like, Foggy Swamp Tribe is a thing, and they all just live in this kind of tribe together. And you can see how different it is here with the whole idea. They have like cat gators as the main animal there. They eat bugs from the swamp and so on. And it is a different culture. And they're all accepting of the swamp being a very mystical place. But no one can explain the tornadoes whatsoever. Very, very interesting. Just to have all this stuff come together in this episode. So overall, it's a solid episode. Again, one of those ones where like I can see why for some people this would be like potentially a personal favorite, but I feel it is missing some bigger moments to kind of that keeps it out of being like one of the absolute best. Because I do think that a lot of the strength comes from just like right at the end when Hugh reveals like who he really is and the wisdom that he gives to everyone. Some of the visions are quite good, but I think they almost could have had a little bit more to the Zuko side of the episode rather than just like one scene at the start, one scene at the end. But solid episode that, again, like I said, the comparison to like a Great Divide or something like that, of like they made going through this notable location in the world very interesting to the point where you want to know more about the swamp and what it is and the spiritual impact. And they kind of like the Great Divide. They keep a little bit of a mystery about like what actually happened between the two tribes. And here, like, what's with the tornado? How did that happen? Was it just a coincidence, or as they sort of reveal at the end with the swamp basically hitting that bird, is the swamp like actually alive and in control of all of this stuff, and what does that mean? But yeah, that's been the episode review. So thanks for watching, and bye.